episode 42 of the Blooms and Barnacles Patreon, where we talk about all things sort of related to James Joyce's Ulysses.
All right.
I am Dermot.
And I think you probably know who I am, because you paid money to listen to this. Welcome. So this episode will be sort of a supplementary text to our main feed episode called Father Con Me. You can certainly listen to this episode without hearing that one, but that is the context in which we find the little snippets of Irish history centering around big houses and the people who lived in them. They're all taken from that Father Con Me passage in Wandering Rocks. Before we get into this episode, I do want to give a heads up. There's one passage in this episode that discusses some incredibly extreme spousal abuse. So if that is something you don't feel like listening to today, then this might be an episode to skip. Also, content warning for many aristocrats. So if you don't like aristocrats, actually you'll love this episode. I think this episode runs the risk of turning you communist when you hear about how these 18th century aristocrats lived their lives and the way they treated people and the amounts of money they had to profligately waste on nothing, essentially nothing.
But nobody does that today.
The concern that I might be too ambiguous, you should not like really any of the people in these stories. Except Mary Rochefort, I have a lot of sympathy for her. You know, she's definitely from those types of people too, but she is
one of the victims.
Yeah.
Exist.
Yeah, so we'll talk about her momentarily. So we're gonna start with Aldborough House, and I'm gonna ask Dermot. Now you and I have been past Aldborough House.
Yeah.
We've told stories. We have a friend in Dublin who took us around to see a bunch of obscure Ulysses sites, including Aldborough House, which is in Portland Row near the Five Lamps. What do you know about Aldborough House?
All I know is it was abandoned. Yeah, I remember it was like a failed construction project where he ran out of money and they never lived in it, and it just went kind of pear-shaped.
So,
and I know when we drove past it, it was just this like sort of vaguely ominous grey building.
No.
Yeah, in some very expensive real estate. What are we doing with this?
And a part of Dublin's north side that is, has not been a very wealthy part of the city. It's known now for being home to Kelly Harrington. Do you know who she is? Olympic boxer.
Okay.
Yes. If you want to see Aldborough House and you're not in Dublin, I would really recommend going to the Google Street View and just going through the years that it's there. And many of those years, there is some version of "We love you, Kelly, go Kelly" graffiti across the front gates of the gatehouse. While it seems like people might be indifferent to Aldborough House, they certainly love Kelly Harrington.
That's good.
So she has done more for the neighborhood than the Earl of Aldborough ever did. So it is mentioned in Ulysses. Father Con Me says, "Near Aldborough House, Father Con Me thought of that spendthrift nobleman, and now it was an office or something."
Okay.
That's it. He moves on very quickly. So let's start with some Aldborough House facts. Built in the 1790s by Edward Stratford, the second Earl of Aldborough. And if I'm not saying that right, I don't want you to tell me. I've done it.
It's pronounced Aldborough.
Yeah, I could say Aldborough, but I think that's how it's Aldborough. In 1790s, it was built by Edward Stratford. We're just going to call him Edward. He's Stratford because his family historically were the aristocrats that controlled the Stratford where Shakespeare grew up. So he was the second Earl of Aldborough. It's located in Portland Row in Dublin's near north side. It is constructed in the Palladian style of architecture. Do you know what that means? Palladian.
It's sort of neoclassical. It was like a Greek revival.
Yes, it's based specifically on the architecture of Palladio, who did architecture in I think Renaissance era Venice. So it's meant to look like that. But yeah, neoclassical is good enough. And it is enormous. It is the second largest house in Dublin of that time period, second only to Leinster House, which Leinster House was the home to the Dukes of Leinster. It is now the building used by the Irish Parliament called the Dáil. So it's a very large building, and this came close. Historian Christine Casey says it was the last grand freestanding aristocratic house to be built in Dublin, and both in scale and site was clearly intended to rival Leinster House. That gives you the mind state of the people who built this. They're like, that guy has the biggest thing. I want to maybe not overshadow him, but I want to get as close as I can. It is currently sitting derelict. On Tashka, which is the National Trust of Ireland, listed Aldborough House as one of Ireland's top 10 most at-risk buildings in 2021. The Dead House did not make that list, so Aldborough House is in very bad condition. Much of this first section is based on an article by Aidan O'Boyle called Aldborough House, Dublin, A Construction History. It is very thorough. If we're going to go through this quickly, I'm not going to get into any of the architectural details. If you're an architecture buff, there are many descriptions of Aldborough House, and the other houses we'll discuss. Architecturally, I am not interested in that. I am interested in the drama and the mess of the people who lived in them and built them and wasted their money in many cases on these. O'Boyle's article does get into that, as does Christine Casey. She wrote a whole book about the grand houses of Dublin. Go read one of theirs and you'll get that itch scratched. So to open, O'Boyle describes Aldborough House bearing a Doric portico bearing the motto Autium cum dignitate. Autium cum dignitate. What do you think that means?
Dignitate, I'm assuming, is root of dignity, or...
It means leisure with dignity.
Yeah.
So that sets the scene. It is a motto to remember as we discuss Edward Stratford. O'Boyle commented on Edward's noted arrogance and eccentricity. He also acknowledges that Edward was a man of considerable ability who held doctorates of law, albeit honorary ones, from the universities of Oxford, Dublin, Leyden, and Glasgow. So he had lots of degrees, but they were all bestowed honorarily, so make of that what you will. Casey says, why don't you read her quote?
Both Lord and Lady Aldborough were keenly interested in the arts, but records indicated that he was an exasperating, dilatory, and undiscerning patron.
What do you think of old Edward so far?
Sounds like the client from hell.
Could
you make it look a little more... If he had heard the phrase "make it pop," he would have been telling people to make it pop.
The problem with old Edward, as we'll see, is like all of these rich people, he wanted a bunch of grand monuments built for his use, purportedly to live in. Spoiler alert, never lived in Aldborough House, which is the scandal of it more than anything else. He also fancied himself quite cultured, a patron and connoisseur of the arts, but if you see words like dilatory, it means he was a dilettante. He didn't know anything, he just dabbled. He had a lot of opinions, but not much real know-how or ability.
Yeah.
But a lot of money, so the artisans he hired were stuck with him until they quit, which often they did. In addition to Aldborough House, he built follies and obelisks, and he also built the industrial town of Stratford-on-Slaney in Wicklow. Have you ever heard of Stratford-on-Slaney?
I have not.
Yeah. There's a little industry town. I can't remember what the industry it was. It's even today is mostly Protestant because those are the people he kind of brought in there.
Right.
That's why it's Stratford-on-Slaney, because he's Edward Stratford.
Okay.
On the Slaney River. He also built Stratford House in London, which is an enormous palatial house in London in the 1770s, which at that time put him in financial difficulty. So that's about 20 years before the drama of Aldborough House. The main Stratford family residence in Ireland was in, I think it's Belan, Belan, which is in County Kildare. So they had a big country house there.
Right.
In 1777, the first Earl of Aldborough, who is Edward's father, died. And Edward, I think, spent a lot of time in London, where he built this big Stratford house that played host to wealthy, famous heads of state and, like people whose names you might have heard, even though they're from the 1770s. Edward returns upon his father's death to Belan to sort out the estate, as he's the oldest brother, and he's now the Earl. He's the Earl now. When he gets there, he finds his brothers have stripped the estate to its bones, stripped away all its assets down to the furnishings, and there is nothing left in the house. And which I think probably throws Edward understandably into a tailspin that would affect him for the rest of his life, because he then attempted to spend or will away all of his own money to keep it out of the hands of his deadbeat brothers, which also made it impossible for him to rebuild or renovate Belan. He had a first wife. They weren't married very long. The Wikipedia page says she died of apoplexy, and I do not know what that means. And I didn't find that listed anywhere else, because his second wife is much more interesting, but I don't know what that means. You have a thought. What is your thought?
Apoplexy. Apoplectic is like an emotional outburst, right? So how do you die of that?
I don't know. I think it must have meant. We'll see as we get into this. Some of these words have different meanings.
Yeah, like nostalgia was like a clinical definition for post-traumatic stress disorder, we call it now.
We'll
right?
get into the formal charge for adultery in the mid-18th century. It was something like they were charged with discussion. They used words differently.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that means. If you do know, we're curious. I'm sure it's something horrific. But in 1787, he married his second wife, Anne Eliza Henniker, who came with a substantial dowry of about £50,000, which is a lot of money. I didn't try to work out what it actually was, but I will say in the second story, Robert Rochfort sues his brother for, I think it's £20,000, which is like millions of pounds in today's money. So it's a lot of money. I always go by the Mr. Darcy scale, because Mr. Darcy had an estate that earned £10,000 a year, and that was like shocking wealth in Pride and Prejudice. So she's 5 times a Darcy year.